Today, I'm reviewing Skyrush, the Intamin hypercoaster at Hersheypark, and this is one wild coaster. In fact, you could make an argument that Skyrush is the most intense roller coaster in the world. For me, there are a small group of coasters worthy of that title. You have the wicked transitions and grey out forces of Intimidator 305, or the unpredictable flipping of the fourth dimension coasters in Ejector and X2. And then you have Skyrush, an Ejector Airtime machine that feels like it's trying to kill you. Few coasters genuinely terrify me, but Skyrush is one of them. This coaster does some violent things to your body. At times, it tries to launch you to the moon. At other points, it tries to slam dunk you into the creek. As a roller coaster enthusiast, I love that intensity. But the average park goer may not be as enthused by Skyrush. Skyrush opened in 2012 with a price tag of $25 million. This hypercoaster was intended to be the park's marquee attraction for years to come. While most roller coaster enthusiasts praised the ride's relentlessness from day one, many park goers found the coaster to be too intense and uncomfortable. For that reason, it's not uncommon to find Skyrush's queue line pretty empty even on a busy day. What makes Skyrush so intense and such a polarizing ride? There are three reasons. 1. Its compactness. Hersheypark has always been pressed for space. Until they recently relocated Park Boulevard, it seemed unlikely they could cram a hypercoaster into their fully developed park. But Intamin found a way to cram Skyrush into the park. While most hypercoasters have a sprawling out and back layout, Skyrush has a compact figure-8 layout above the creek. This means the coaster didn't have the space for the more gradual transitions you'll find in other hypercoasters, or the larger hills. 2. The forces. Skyrush may just have the most powerful ejector airtime on the planet. Not only is the strength of the airtime otherworldly, but the ejector airtime is quite sustained as well. But beyond the airtime, you also have some grey out inducing turns, and the Stangle dives have vicious laterals. Skyrush treats your body like a rag doll. 3. The restraints. Arguably the most hated aspect of Skyrush are those restraints. It's why the coaster has earned the nickname Thigh Crush over the years. Skyrush has lap bars, but unlike most coasters where the lap bar has a broad surface that contours against the thighs of riders, Skyrush's lap bars have a narrow bar that contacts the thighs of riders. So instead of spreading the force over a larger area, Skyrush's restraints concentrate the force in a localized area. That isn't helped by the fact the pullout from the first drop absolutely staples riders, which can make the intense airtime that follows even more painful. Now, do I personally find the restraints in Skyrush painful? No. Are they a bit uncomfortable? Absolutely. They are very tight, but I think the minimalistic restraints actually enhance the experience. Since the restraints only contact a small section of your thighs, you feel extremely open. Your entire upper body is free. On those powerful airtime hills, it feels like Skyrush is trying to rip your upper body from your legs. And on the Stangle dives, your body is wildly flung to the side, only held in by your thighs. In the few instances where I've been able to marathon Skyrush without disembarking from the train, my thighs did start to hurt after 3 to 4 consecutive rides. But in most circumstances where I have to walk back around, that gives my body enough time to recover without getting real pain. I hinted at it earlier, but the appeal of Skyrush for me is just how brutal this coaster is and how wildly different it feels from almost every other coaster out there. It feels like Skyrush was designed for the die-hard coaster enthusiast, and because of it, I love it. Now, I know not everyone loves Skyrush, and that's why Hersheypark actually opened their second hypercoaster in 2020 in Candymonium. Candymonium is a B&M hypercoaster that offers an immensely re-rideable experience with butter-smooth tracking and copious amounts of floater airtime. The two rides offer wildly different experiences, and that's why the two coasters can coexist harmoniously in the same park. I think the average parkgoer will prefer Candymonium, but the thrill seeker will prefer Skyrush still. Skyrush is located in Comet Hollow near the front of Hersheypark, and this is one imposing looking coaster. The bright yellow track looks gargantuan, especially because of how Intamin minimized the use of supports. From some vantage points, many hills, including the lift hill, don't even look like they have supports. Skyrush also makes the Comet look like a kiddie coaster. In my first visit, Comet looked pretty imposing as it towered over the flat rides at the front of the park. But then Skyrush was built quite literally over Comet, and it stands over twice as tall. Skyrush can be a bit of a difficult coaster to photograph from inside the park. Hersheypark used to have this awesome pathway beneath Skyrush that connected Founder's Circle to the Hollow, but that pathway was closed off after the 2018 season. I was bummed to learn that because this pathway offers some unique vantage points that you can't get elsewhere. It was so odd and rare to be so close to a hypercoaster like this. Now, the best views of Skyrush can be found along Park Boulevard outside the park. In terms of seat selection, Skyrush is unequivocally a back row ride for me. I'll get to it in a bit, but it's a crime to deprive yourself the experience of that first drop in the back row. Skyrush is one of the best first drops in the world. I also despise waiting for the front row in Skyrush. The queue line for the front row starts incredibly early, so it often backs up. It's not uncommon to find more people waiting for the front row than every other row combined. Now, the front is excellent, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to justify me waiting for the front when I can get 4 to 5 rides in a superior seat in the same amount of time. One other aspect I have not yet mentioned is that Skyrush has pseudo-wing seating. Skyrush has 4 cross trains, and the middle 2 seats are above a floor, but the outside 2 seats are offset on the wing, so riders in these seats have no floor and feel completely exposed. These wing seats are where you want to ride if you want to experience the most intense laterals. Skyrush begins with one of the steepest and fastest lift hills in the world. Believe it or not, Hersheypark actually has slowed this lift down after its opening year in an effort to reduce the ride's intensity. But it had little effect. You still crest this hill incredibly quickly, and Skyrush is still one of the craziest coasters in the world. Unfortunately, you get to the hill so quickly you don't have much time to admire the wonderful view of downtown Hershey though, but if you want views, go check out the Kissing Tower. You then crest the lift and riders are treated to one of the most intense drops in the world. I would describe Skyrush's first drop as a car accident gone right. It's a glorious and enjoyable car accident. The first drop begins by giving back row riders some insanely powerful and sustained ejector airtime. That alone would have made the drop stand out. But halfway down the drop, something happens. Skyrush somehow offers a second burst of airtime. I have no clue how Skyrush does it. There's nothing in the profiling of the drop that would inherently suggest you get a second pop of airtime, but Skyrush does it. I was completely caught off guard my first ride, and this drop still blows me away to this day. For those of you who have not experienced this drop, imagine the most powerful ejector airtime you've ever experienced. Now, while you're still hovering above the seat, imagine being pressed forward forcibly even further out of your seat. That's exactly what Skyrush does to you. And the pullout from this drop is equally as intense for different reasons. The compactness of this pullout means riders are bombarded with positive Gs. You're almost guaranteed to gray out here, and you probably won't regain your vision until you crest the top of the next airtime hill. But this valley does present 2 problems. One, there is quite a bit of shuffling here. It's not enough to cause a headache, for me at least, but the train really rattles from the high Gs. 2, if you weren't stapled by the ride op in the station, the ride will staple you here. Resistance is futile. So if you hate the restraints in Skyrush, this part of the ride will be your arch nemesis. The second hill in Skyrush gives 3 to 4 seconds of powerful and sustained ejector airtime. And this is one of the best airtime moments in the world. You sustain the airtime as long as you do on a B&M hypercoaster, except Skyrush offers insane ejector airtime as opposed to floater airtime. Skyrush then rips around a low to the ground turn, and this is the second point on the ride where you're likely going to gray out. This turn feels like a miniature version of the famous turn in I-305 to a lesser degree. And like the first turn, it does have a bit of a rattle here. Once you regain your vision, you will find yourself rocketing over yet another camelback. And this one has airtime equally as strong as the second hill. It's sustained in borderline violent ejector airtime. Plus, this hill also has a terrifying head chopper with the prior hill. You then whiz around another low to the ground turn. This one doesn't cause me a gray out, but it's still very intense because of how fast you're traveling and because of how close you are to the creek. it feels like your head will skim against the water. That's followed by the first of 2 Stengel dives. This is a hill that banks riders one way before rapidly banking them in the opposite direction on the pullout. The best way to describe this element is that the floor drops out and then you're swatted like a fly to the side. So the element starts with an abrupt pop of ejector airtime, but the banking then causes you to be viciously thrown to the side. Skyrush is often considered the king of airtime, but it low-key may be also the king of laterals. There are coasters with more sustained laterals than Skyrush, but I think Skyrush may offer the most intense laterals of any coaster when you consider how open the restraints are and the violence of those laterals. You then travel up this little hill before ripping around yet another low-to-the-ground turn. Riders get a quick pop of ejector airtime and are simultaneously thrown to the side. The airtime and lateral combination is less abrupt than the prior Stengel dive, but I think the laterals may be more intense here. That's followed by the second Stengel dive, and this one rides similarly to the first. It's a crazy moment of ejector airtime and laterals. I struggle to keep my hands up during this element because it's an overload of intense ride forces coming together. You then rip over the ride's final great airtime hill. This one runs alongside the Comet. And this hill is yet another instance of powerful and sustained ejector airtime. The first drop and 3 camelbacks are all some of the strongest airtime moments in the world, and it's amazing they exist on the same coaster. At that point, Skyrush is effectively over. Skyrush then dives out of the creek and leisurely winds its way over Founder's Circle around the Comet before hitting the brake run. Usually I'd penalize a coaster for letting its foot off the gas, but it's completely understandable as Skyrush. Because of the ride's location, it had to use all its remaining kinetic energy just to get back to the station. Plus, you were just treated 40 seconds of non-stop intensity, so the breather is actually a bit welcome. One final thing to note is that when Skyrush runs 2 trains, the restraints actually tend to unlock an inch or so while you're waiting on the brake run. This is a very welcome relief in the event you're stacked on the brake run for a while, and it just goes to show that Hersheypark acknowledges the restraints in Skyrush can be uncomfortable. So what would I give Skyrush? Is it any question? I'm personally giving this insane coaster a 10 out of 10. Skyrush offers a ride experience unlike any other. This coaster doesn't feel like it should exist. It offers some of the craziest airtime and laterals in the world with some of the most minimalistic restraints in the world in a hypercoaster. Skyrush is non-stop intensity from start to finish, and it always leaves me breathless. The ride isn't perfect. As I mentioned in my review, the restraints can make the experience uncomfortable, and the ride has a shimmy during the high G sections. But I am willing to look past those issues as they do not detract from the ride experience for me personally. Those are the price we need to pay for such an intense ride. And I'm willing to pay that price every time. But as I mentioned earlier, Skyrush is not for everyone. So if you want an ejector airtime machine that feels like it's trying to kill you, Skyrush is the ride for you. This is one of the best steel coasters in the world, in my opinion, if you want pure thrills. What are your thoughts on Skyrush? On the ride itself or the restraints? Are you a fan of this Intamin hypercoaster? I would love to hear your comments down below. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate if you gave this video a like and considered subscribing, as we'll have a lot more roller coaster and amusement park videos here at Canopy Coaster. Thanks for listening.